Editing a novel and getting it to the point where you feel certain it's good enough to ask someone to pay for it can be a long, lonely journey. Sometimes, as writers, we can go through periods where it's hard to see how it will ever come together. We can begin to doubt our skill or get frustrated by how long it's taking. We can get distracted by the shiny idea of a new, easier, more exciting project. We can convince ourselves that we simply don't have what it takes. Creativity and sticking with a project to completion is as much a personal growth journey as it is about the edits themselves, and I want to talk about that more this year. No matter what doubts or roadblocks try to hold you back, know this: you are not alone. Don't give up on yourself. It will come together as long as you keep moving forward. So, how do you do that when you're feeling stuck? Let's start looking for solutions together. Whew. Edits can be tough. Editing a novel when it really needs extensive edits and you're dealing with a mess of a rough draft can sometimes feel really difficult, especially when the mindset blocks start kicking in of, this is too hard, I don't know what to do with this, no one's ever going to want to read this, it feels hopeless. And I almost called this video how to not give up on your book even when your edits feel hopeless, or it feels like it's never going to come together, or you feel like everything you write is terrible. I think so often in the writing world, we focus a lot on outlining and structuring your book, which is helpful in the editing process, but a lot of times the focus is on that outlining and getting the rough draft on paper. And then suddenly we skip to discussion on how to polish that book and how to proofread it. But there's not as much body of work dealing with how do you go from a messy rough draft to a completed novel that feels really good, that's ready for proofreading. Because that polishing, that self-editing is more than just, let me reword this a little bit, let me strengthen this character arc, or let me tweak things just a little. For many of us, edits can often be extensive. Like, I need major rewrites. I need to completely change this character. The points of view aren't right. And so we go from a messy, rough draft without a real roadmap to how do I go through all of these extensive edits to even get it to a point where it just needs a few tweaks or it just needs to be polished up. And I feel like there's just not as much direction on that. And I think part of it is because every book is going to be different and every writer's process is going to be different, because some people pants their way through their rough draft and they're experimenting and trying things. So what they end up with at the end of a rough draft is really, maybe disjointed, or maybe it's just intuitive writing, but they need to go back through and kind of figure out where the structure is. Somebody else might have plotted extensively and you get to the end of it and all it needs is a few tweaks or a couple of rewrites. And each book might be different. So I have written books where by the time I got to the ending, the story was so clear and it came out so well that all I needed was a few changes, a little bit of edits, and the book was done in just a few weeks or even a month, and it was ready to go. And then there are books like The Disappearance of Vanessa Shaw. So this is the book I've been working on for multiple years. I actually started this book all the way back in 2019 and then picked it back up a couple of years ago, thinking that it would be a quick sort of palate cleanser because I was struggling with Shadow Demons book 12. So I thought, okay, I can work on this other one while I'm sort of figuring out some other things in my life and busy here and whatnot. And as many of you know, if you've been following this channel for a while, this book did not turn out to be just an easy, quick jaunt into Editville. Like, I really needed extensive edits once I had finished the rough draft. And even the rough draft was difficult for me to get all the way through. And it has just been a book that is more difficult in terms of edits. It has needed extensive rewrites, and then even those rewrites still don't feel right. And so I've been tweaking it yet again. So I'm probably on my 6th draft of this book, and I'm still working my way through. Now, I will give you guys some more updates on how the book is coming together because it's closer than it's ever been before, but it's still not quite ready for a pre-order. But what I wanted to focus on in this video, because this is so fresh for me, is how do we go from, I don't know exactly what's wrong or how to fix this book, from that point to actually moving forward in making changes and fixing the book itself without feeling stuck or asking ourselves a bunch of questions or feeling like we're just running around in circles. What can we do to actually move forward and finish the book? And then also, how do we stay motivated for the long term of a project without looking at that next shiny idea and saying, you know what, that idea sounds a lot easier. I think I'm just going to let this one sit and go on to the next. Because sometimes that can be the right move to say, this book isn't coming together. Let me write something else to get my writing going again. So I'm at least working on something, but it's not always the right move because some of us have a tendency to jump from beginning a story to beginning a story to beginning a story and never actually finishing anything. And that can be also a difficult place to be emotionally because most of us writers, because we want to actually see something through and we want to finish it and we want to publish it. And so how do we keep motivation up? How do we stick with a project all the way through? How do we even know when it's finished? I have a series of videos here on YouTube from several years ago on editing and self-editing and what my process is. And I also have some other just random videos here and there, one-off videos about editing. So I will link all of those down below if you want to see my actual editing process. But what we're going to focus on today is how do you get yourself unstuck when you know the book needs extensive rewrites, but you aren't 100% sure. And then how do you get your mindset in the right place to actually keep working on it, even when it feels like it's just taking too long or you aren't sure you have the skill for it or that kind of thing. So let's talk about that. What I'm going to give you is 10 different tips or ideas of ways that you can keep moving forward. So one of the first ones is go back to the plot and get an overview of the story and ask yourself what's not working. Start with the beginning of the book, walk through each scene, or you can start with the supposed tent poles, right? So you can say, how about the beginning of the book? Does that feel like the right place to start? And sort of get an eagle-eye view of the story as a whole and say, what needs strengthening? Where do things begin to fall apart? Because your process might depend on, are we working just on the first part of the book and maybe the beginning of it has set the wrong tone? Or is everything really good up until that midpoint and we just need to fix the ending? So just one of the first steps is to, like, instead of just seeing it as this massive problem, actually go back and write down what is your opening scene, what is the act one climax, what's that doorway that leads your character into break into two, as they say, and save the cat. Depending on what you're using as a plotting method or a structural method, start looking at those major turning points or those major moments in your story and say beginning, act one climax or break into two, midpoint, that break into three where you're looking at that final act or that final set of scenes, the final climax, and then the resolution. Like what out of those like 5 or 6 main points is working and what isn't working? Where does it begin to fall apart? And if you can at least start to identify, okay, I think this part of the book is doing well, but this part is not doing good, then you kind of at least have some anchors there where you can say, this stays the way it is. Now I need to work on these other parts. And once you have that eagle-eye view, you can sort of zoom in and say, okay, it's this act 3. It's just such a big mess. And I think I'm going to start working on that piece of the puzzle and experimenting with that one spot to see if I can make everything else fall into place. Because when we just see it as a 90,000 word book that all needs to be fixed, it can start to feel a little bit too overwhelming. So take it piece by piece, go back to whatever you used originally to structure it. Like if you used a 3-act structure or a 4-act structure or the snowflake method or whatever you were using, save the cat, story structure of any kind, and see what pieces seem to really fit the way that you wanted them to and what pieces need work. And then zoom in on the pieces that need the most work and see if you can begin there. Number two, if you feel like your book just isn't coming together and you've already been looking at the plot and you've just gotten sick of looking at the plot, turn instead to look at your main character's character arc, because sometimes there's something hiding there where your character isn't actually having the transformation that we wanted to see, or your character isn't giving us the motivation carried all the way through, or you haven't set up that character and that sort of upside down world and the way that they're reacting to things in that second half of the book. So there could be something there when it comes to your character's arc that is really messing up the plot. They might be acting in a way that doesn't actually fit in with the way their character is supposed to be growing. Could be any number of things. But if you, instead of mapping out your Act 1 climax and things like that, map out your character arc instead. If you have just really no idea what I'm talking about, I highly recommend checking out K.M. Weiland's book, Creating Character Arcs. Another really great book to check out is James Scott Bell's Write Your Novel from the Middle, which is all about the mirror moment and that midpoint in your character's journey. Both of those will be super helpful for character arc development. Number three is to actually pick up a different plotting method that you haven't used before, some other way of looking at story structure. Now, maybe you are a learner and you are a plot junkie and you have already looked at things from every single angle. But if, let's say, you've been using James Scott Bell's superstructure and you've got those like 8 plot points or however many he uses in that book, and that's how you plotted your book and that's how you got things down on the page, maybe now take a look at Save the Cat Writes a Novel and say, okay, I'm going to look at it from this framework and see if I can identify how my novel lines up with Save the Cat or how it doesn't. Sometimes just taking a fresh look at plot, even just watching someone's video on how to plot a novel, picking up a fresh book or looking at a fresh method can be helpful. And it can get us out of the ways that we're already stuck, because if you've looked at it from one perspective, sometimes just kind of flipping that on its head and saying, oh, let me look at it from this other method can identify holes or places where we needed to strengthen something up, or it can make us identify like, oh, this Act 1 is happening too soon, or I don't have the proper motivation here. And it can just sometimes have an aha moment that I was looking at this wrong, or here's where I can fix my story. Number 4, talk through your book with someone else. This can be a partner, this can be a good friend, this can be a reader, or it can be a fellow author. If you just don't have anybody to talk to, come into my Discord server or into our Heart Breathings writing community and say, hey, this is what I write. Is anybody willing to get on a Zoom call with me this weekend and let's talk through our plots? And having somebody to actually bounce ideas off of. Because sometimes when we are so into our story, it's just like a hamster wheel running in our heads, and we just think the same things over and over. And I call it like, it feels slippery when I'm trying to figure out how does changing this midpoint affect all these other things. There's so many moving pieces in the story that in my own brain, when I'm just trying to think it through, it feels slippery. Like I can't quite hold on to the thoughts. I can't quite express them the way that I want. It's just nebulous. But if I talk through it with someone and I'm actually saying, okay, here's what happens and here's what happens, sometimes just in the process of trying to explain it, I understand like, oh, that doesn't actually make sense. I need something like a catalyst, or I need to explain this better, or I need some kind of action that happens in between, and just verbally expressing it. And if all else fails and you don't have anyone that you can rely on or that you trust or that you feel confident talking to, just talking to a voice recorder can be helpful. It's just a matter of going from thinking through it in your head to actually putting it out there. You could try writing it down, you could try typing, but that's the same process of actual writing. And I find that verbalizing it can just give your brain a little kick to say, oh, let's look at this a different way. Number 5, if you have the possibility of doing this, is to immerse yourself in the story for a prolonged period of time. This doesn't work for everybody because some people just don't want to focus for that period of time. But this is something that is intensely helpful for me, because if I just have an hour a day to work on something and I have a lot of problems to untangle, I'm just getting started in the untangling of ideas, just getting my mind wrapped around it when it's time to move on to something else. And then I have lots of other things going on throughout the day. Get back to it tomorrow. It takes me 15 or 20 minutes to get back into the same mode I was in yesterday. And then I only get a little bit more. So I'm just kind of inching forward. It's kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back every single day. But I find that when I get to a certain point where I'm just ready to really think through it, then it's more helpful for me to say, okay, I'm going to give myself really big chunks of time to just think about this story, to really get all the pieces down. And I'll show you some of the things that I actually do to work with this method when I'm immersing myself. I had the luxury of going away to Waco a couple of weeks ago to immerse myself in the story and had a major aha moment. Required some more rewrites. However, I was able to get the entire first act into the first time I have felt like it's finally finished, like really done. And that happened because I was able to go away for 2 full days. And right, I did not vlog the experience because I just said, nope, I don't need any distractions. I just want to focus on this. And part of that immersive experience also involved me, ironically, getting on a FaceTime call with my husband and talking with him for 3 hours through the story. So it's kind of funny that I went away to talk with him, but it was this non-distracted time and I was able to stay up as late as I needed to stay up. I was able to go to coffee shops and just live in my story world for 3 full days, really 2.5 days. And that was super, super helpful. So sometimes giving yourself more space and more time to continuously think about your story can be very helpful. Number 6, try starting at the end of the story. So a lot of times when we're trying to fix a rough draft, we just end up back at the beginning. We work our way through, we hit a wall, we try to figure it out, doesn't come together. Back to the beginning. And this is actually something that I learned when it comes to playing piano, that you're almost practicing your mistakes. Like I would start at the beginning of a piano piece, I would play until I would make a mistake, get frustrated, go back to the beginning. And what ended up happening was instead of practicing and figuring out the part that was messed up, I was going back over and over and over again to practice the beginning. And then as I would work my way through, I was practicing that mistake over and over and over again. I would play all the way through, hit the same mistake, play all the way through, hit the same mistake. And we do that with our writing sometimes, with our editing process. We'll go back to the beginning, we'll work through tweaking things, trying to make it as good as we can make it. And that feels confident because that's our comfort zone. There's those first few chapters that feel pretty good. And we feel like we're making progress because we're updating words, a sentence here and there, whatever, but we're actually still avoiding the part that most needs the work. And so if you just keep coming across, like starting at the beginning, hitting a wall over and over again, try flipping it and starting at the end. What is that final resolution scene? Get that to a place where you can see, okay, this is how this is all going to resonate at the end. Here's the cliffhanger I'm going to lead them on, or here's the reveal, or here's how these characters live happily ever after. Work on that last scene. Then go to the next to last scene. Work your way back to the climax and continue to work your way back until you hit those same problem areas from the other side. So you're kind of working your way along the rope. And then once you hit a problem over here, try going back to that middle part where you kept banging your head and trying to work between this spot and this spot. Because the beginning's good, the end is good. This is where I'm having the problem. And that can just help you identify it. And you can actually work a little bit this way, a little bit this way, a little bit this way, come in, fix the scene in the middle, and continue to work your way through. And sometimes it's just that mental break of looking at it from a fresh perspective, starting at the ending, that can help bring it all together. Because sometimes what you'll find is, this ending doesn't actually resonate the way that I've set it up in the beginning. I've set up all these flaws for my heroine and then I never resolve them at the end. So maybe that's the part that needs to get fixed. And sometimes looking at it from that fresh perspective can bring in those aha moments. Number 7 is to question what you think you already know for certain. So a lot of times we'll have certain pieces of our story that we don't even question. When we know the story isn't coming together, we think we've identified X, Y, and Z are the problem. But A, B, and C are definitely happening. So for example, like in the disappearance of Vanessa Shaw, I might be working with several things I feel like I know are true. For example, I know that Vanessa is dead, or I know that this person is the one who killed her, or I know for certain that this is exactly the order of events that happened that night, and I'm just trying to fix all these other things. So when I get to a point where I'm just like, I've looked at this from so many different angles and I cannot figure out how to untangle this mess over here, I have to turn my eye to what are those A, B, C fundamental pieces of the story that I thought I knew for certain. Sometimes it's going to be a realization that your entire genre is off, that you'll say, oh my gosh, what if this isn't actually a teenage coming of age story, but it's actually a women's fiction about a 30-year-old woman who's just thinking back to some of the things that happened on her past? Like sometimes those fundamental things are exactly what's wrong with the story. What if this isn't a romance at all? What if this is actually their breakup story? Like sometimes those kinds of moments are going to be necessary to question the things we thought we knew for certain. And of course, we want to be careful about shifting genres because many of us are like well known and branded for writing specific genres, but it can be helpful to take all the things you think you know and turn them on their heads and start to question them. Number 8 is, of course, back to some of my plotting roots, which is to make note cards or index cards of every scene in your book. So what this can do, especially when you do them the way that I'm going to show you how to do them, if you haven't seen my entire series on creating index cards and writing scenes, I highly recommend checking it out because I do go into this. Some of the pivotal works that I recommend you check out are places like Story Genius from Lisa Cron or K.M. Weiland's book on structuring your novel. All of these are such great resources. I do have an entire video on my favorite books on writing as well as an Amazon list of my favorite books. But when it comes to writing scenes, I think Scene and Sequel is really important as well as Story Genius. Those are both really good. And what I like to do, so I used to, if you've been around for a while, I used to always put my index cards on a ring where I would punch the hole, like a hole in the side and put them on a book ring. But sometimes you want to switch up your methods. So I found this little sort of, it's basically like a photo album and it holds these 3x5 note cards. And I've been using this so that I can pull the note cards out, but they're fully protected inside. But instead of just seeing them on a ring where I can only really read one at a time, I can read up to 4 at a time. And it's really easy for me to flip back and forth between 8 different note cards. And what I like to put on each note card, so I write multiple POVs, so you can see as I get deeper into it that each point of view has a different color on the note card. So that is my indicator that I've switched points of view. And in this particular book, all of my multiple POV scenes are in the past timeline. So I have dual timelines. There's the summer leading up to Vanessa's disappearance, and then there's the present day, which is a year after her disappearance. And so anytime you see a color that is not purple, which is my main heroine, that means that it's happening in the past and it's a different point of view. And so I will start out my note card with the point of view at the top. I also put a little note here about where this is happening in the plot. So this is the prologue. Is it the Act 1 climax? Is it the argument against transformation? Like what purpose is this scene showing in the story structure itself? And then I do a little bit of an overview. So this one says, Lorelai chases Vanessa out of the cabin and into the woods. It's raining. Doesn't really tell me the details of the scene, but it just tells me the setup. Like this is kind of the setup of what's happening. So another one over here says, Kieran calls them into the living room and plays a slideshow. So it's just something to remind me of this is the scene where that happens. Then I have 3 main things here: the goal, the conflict, and the outcome. So I have the character's goal in this particular scene. What does my character want out of this scene? And then what is the conflict? What is keeping them from getting what they want in this scene? And then what is the outcome? How does it all turn out? Usually it's, okay, my character goes into it wanting one thing, something else happens, and now they have a new plan or something new that they desire, or they're feeling some kind of way about what just happened. So there's usually some kind of character arc transformation, there's conflict, there's clues, any of those kind of things can happen. And anytime I'm working on my rough draft, I will put as much of this information as I can on the card. But a lot of times I can't actually fill this out to completion during a rough draft because I don't know all this information. I'm still exploring it. But as I go through each round of edits, I will continue to throw out cards, make new note cards. And this visual process of not only being able to see it, like actually written out what are the bones of this scene, but also being able to take them all. I will, like when I was in Waco, I took them all out of these pouches and I lined them up on the floor so that I could actually see the order. And what happens when you are able to see in a visual layout or a visual overview of the scenes is I can see how this outcome or this clue, or however this scene ended up, naturally leads me into the next scene, not just in the order of events, but also in my character's motivation, what's going on with my character's relationships, how they're following up properly on clues. And so following through with this type of index card view where you're writing out your character's goal, the basics of what's happening in the scene, the conflict between characters or the conflict between your character and themselves or whatever that conflict is, how it ended up, then you get a chance to say, okay, then what happens next? And make sure that the next note card that you place underneath it is an answer to what happens next, that your character is now moving in a logical way onto the next scene. I also put here any other kind of notes. So are there any clues that are going to play into this since it's a mystery? If you were writing a romance, you might put in here something about the character arc or the actual progression of the romance. Like if you've read Gwen Hayes' Romancing the Beach, she has different story beats. So you might be following Save the Cat writes a novel and also this other method. So you might keep them both in order here on your prologue or on your index cards. So this might also say something like first hints of her thoughts on such and such, or the first hints that she's feeling some attraction to this guy, or the first clue that this might be happening, or the first hint of something paranormal or ghostly happening. That way I can track all of these things on the actual cards themselves, and I can put them out in a story grid so I can actually see it exactly the way it's going to be. And sometimes just the process of doing that will trigger something in my mind to say, oh, okay, the progression of this isn't working quite right. Or because I'm working with dual timelines, I can see, oh, I didn't set this up in the past yet to be found out in the future. So I've got to reorganize these scenes. And for me, that visual flow can be super helpful. Now, do I think that it always is beneficial to fill out this level of detail in scene cards? No, I don't think every novel calls for it. I think that it can be a way to procrastinate if you don't actually need it. But when you're stuck and you just aren't sure where to go next, this can be a dynamite method for really sorting through your thoughts and getting them on paper in a visual way rather than just trying to work through it in your head. If you don't like using just paper planning type tools, a visual tool that you can use. There's a few different visual tools that you can use, so feel free to leave yours down below. But you can use Scrivener. They have kind of built-in index cards. You can also use Plotter, which is Plottr. And inside Plotter, if you go to some of their tools, they actually have my exact scene outline cards that you can use. And it says, I think Sarra Cannon's scene cards or something like that. It might say Heart Breathing scene cards, but you can find those in there if you want to use those. And that gives you that visual overview. There's other timeline type apps that you can use, but I highly recommend Plotter if you want to give that a try. Number 9 is really just piggybacking off of that. So instead of index cards, take out a piece of big paper. I use grid paper that is like 11 by 17 and actually put your story flow on to some kind of chart like that. Again, you can use Plotter for it, but I'm going to just show you briefly what it looks like when I've been doing this. So this isn't really a separate tip. It's just another way of doing the same thing that you were doing with your index cards, just with a different overview. Okay, so I have this graph paper, basically. I think it's 11 by 17. I got it from Amazon. You can also get it from Office Depot or probably any local office supply store. It comes in a pad, and so you've got this big grid where there's lots of little boxes. You could also use a foam board. You could use, like I was putting stuff on my wall, like easel paper. You could just use regular 8.5 by 11 sheets, whatever it is you have. But I like this bigger sheet because you can fit more on it. So it looks like this normally. I have tried two different methods of plotting on a timeline view, or also plotting kind of like 4 sections like this, where I have, so my book is dual timeline. So I've got present, past, present, past, present, past, present, past. And I've got these smaller 1.5 by 2 inch index, or not index cards, but Post-it notes that can go on here to kind of indicate the different points of view. So you could do it this way. When I originally was plotting, I was doing it in this sort of from top to bottom. This would be the Act 1 climax, then the beginning of Act 2 and the midpoint, and so on. But when I went away to my writing retreat, I started a new version where I decided to give myself more space. So I went on a timeline view, and this is Act 1, Act 2, and then I've got Section 3 and Section 4. So I, on this sheet, bought these little, I don't know, rectangular stickers, and I got them from Amazon. I'll link them down below, and they have all of my different point of view colors on them. And so what I started to do was basically plot out in a visual overview, a timeline view. And again, if you want to do this digitally, this is super easy. This is like what Plotter does. And then each one of these, you could open up a scene card for it. I do plan on using Plotter for my upcoming Mirror of Shadows, but I just also like paper planning, so I decided to do it in this way for this particular book. But I do highly recommend that, and we'll share with you more when I start to do it. But I basically just took a Sharpie pen to write on the stickers because they're a little bit kind of waxy. So if you used a gel pen on here, it would just smear. So I was using a Sharpie pen to write on the stickers, and I was putting, okay, so like here's Lorelei, here's the prologue. She chases Vanessa out of the cabin into the woods. And then what piece of the plot is found here? So the theme is stated. When will you stop waiting for others to tell you who you are? So that's the theme of the book. Then that's also the opening image. And then we go into the present timeline, which is at the top, the past timeline, which is at the bottom. And I say, okay, Vanessa or Lorelei pulls up to the bridge. Do I stay? Can I live a normal life if I don't? What are the questions she's asking herself? What's actually happening here in the story? I've also indicated any little pieces of dialogue or character arc or things that are actually happening that I felt like were important that started to come up when I started plotting it this way. But you can easily see how that Act 1 started to come together. Then I would put in Act 2. And then I also have a separate sheet underneath where I would put in the 3rd part and the 4th part. And then I have a little washi tape tab here that I was using. And for me, sometimes I will do all of these methods. I will have them in index cards. I'll have it here in my notebook, which is getting really full, by the way. And I'll also be thinking through it here, because if my mind is getting stuck on it, I need to approach it from multiple different ways. But that doesn't mean that I think everyone needs to do it this way. But what I encourage you to do is to lean into the natural ways that you begin to think through things. Is it movement? Is it talking through with other people? Is it verbalizing? Is it seeing a visual representation? Or is it just getting into the work and trying it several different ways? The key is to figure out what works for you as an individual. And it may never be stickers and color code, or it might be exactly what you needed. So this is just another way to get a visual overview of your story. Tip number 10 is really just to refill the well. Maybe the story isn't coming together because you're just too attached to it. You're too close to it. You've got too much wrapped up in it that you can't see the forest for the trees. So you just need a break. And so I know that it can feel really tempting to go and start a whole new story, a whole new book, because that feels like easier and more exciting. But sometimes that can mean that we never come back to our original manuscript. So if you decide to work on something else, I would really recommend giving yourself some kind of deadline. Like, I will give myself until March 30th to work on this other thing, and then I'm coming back to finish this. But also what can happen if you go work on a different story is that you're no longer sort of ruminating or thinking through this particular story anymore. And so it just gets lost. And now your brain is all dedicated to this new thing. And that's why you continue to work on new thing after new thing after new thing without following through. So you may not want to work on something new, but what I recommend if you decide to take a break and step away is 2 things. One, if you have already identified the places that are causing you the most trouble, like the questions of the story, like what in the world is going to happen between these two characters, or what is the climax of this? How does this all end up? If you have questions, write them on a big Post-it note, put it on your mirror, put it on your computer, put it on your TV or your gaming console, put a Post-it note or an index card or some kind of reminder, even if it's just a pop-up on your phone, like an alarm once a day that says, what happens in the climax? Just to remind your brain that we are still wanting our subconscious to be working through this issue, and keep working on it. But also allow yourself to step away and just refill the well. Read some books, listen to some podcasts, go for walks, go out and do something fun for a little while, go to a zoo, go to a museum. Just completely take the pressure off and just allow yourself to live in the world, have some experiences, let your mind sort of wander and ruminate on the problem when you get a chance, and then see if it starts to come together and come back to it with fresh eyes and follow these steps again. Because sometimes we just are burned out, or our minds are so hyper-focused or fixated on one piece of the story, and we just need to give it a little bit more space, and that's okay too. Okay, so this video, again, is turning out so much longer than I intended. I'm just having a hard time doing any kind of short videos this year, so I hope that you're enjoying the longer videos. I did want to talk a little bit about how do you keep moving forward when you feel like it's just been so difficult and it's just not coming together. First of all, I hope that these 10 tips have been helpful and that you were already excited to start working on them. But when it comes to the mindset, let me just quickly run through a few things that have been helping me stick with the story, even though it feels like it's taking too long. I'm not sure I have the skill to pull it off, or any of those kind of negative things that pop in. So one is just keep showing up. Set a date for yourself that you're not going to avoid the story unless you're actively taking a break. Set a time that you're going to show up for your story every day, and make note. Have some kind of writing journal or some kind of place where you keep track of the wins. Because sometimes if you've been working on it for months, it can just feel like this is not moving forward. But the truth is, you've gotten several scenes, you've rewritten this, you've been tweaking things. So keep some kind of log of your daily wins. Even if it's just, I sat down and I got 30 minutes done, or I had this one tiny little piece of the story came together, or I found one sentence that I really did like. Start to keep track of those wins so you can begin to build positive momentum. It will be helpful. And then on those days where you just feel like you've done nothing and it sucks, go back and look at that log of all your wins. Number two, really lean into what motivates you, because sometimes you're going to have to create your own momentum and your own motivation, especially if edits are taking a really long time and there's no like outer reward of, I've got, praise, or I'm getting sales, or I'm getting, it's in fact, sometimes it's taking you so long. If you have existing fans, or you have an editor or someone that's waiting on you, it can feel like negative pressure. Like, why aren't you getting it done? So just trust yourself and lean into the things that you know can motivate you, and try to get into a place of self-motivation. So I made a little bit of a list. So it could be personal deadlines. It could be time off that you just really need a break for a little bit. It could be a new story, but again, same warnings that I said before. It could be a trip where you're going to go on a writing retreat, meet up with friends. It could be a bookstore trip, like where you're just going to go and you're going to be in a bookstore for a little while, and you're going to write in cafes and be out of your just normal day to day to sort of keep yourself motivated. It could be a daily pep talk that you listen to some of your favorite motivational speakers, or you pep talk yourself, or you go to your friend that you know is always cheering you on. It could be some kind of vision board, or sitting down and actually getting a visual representation, like an aesthetic Pinterest board or something like that of your story that reminds you why you were writing it in the first place. It could be a set of rewards, like every time I get another 500 words, I get a piece of chocolate, or every time I finish an act, I get to go out to a cafe and get a coffee. It could be a set of rewards. It could also be a set of consequences if that motivates you more frequently than rewards do, where you say, if I don't finish this by Friday, I can't go to the movies Saturday night, or there's no date night this weekend unless I finish this. So it could be consequences. It could be getting feedback from other people. So maybe if it motivates you to keep turning in chapters to your partner, or to your beta reader, or to your critique partner, or even your editor, just getting that feedback maybe can be a helpful part of the process instead of feeling like you're alone. It could be community and just getting in with like Heart Breathing's writing community and saying, I'm going to write every morning at 9 a.m. when so-and-so is doing sprints, or I'm going to join JD on her sprints every Wednesday night, or whatever it happens to be, that you're just going to lean heavily into that community and keep updating people. But just kind of get an idea, write down some ideas of things that make you feel positive energy around your story and lean in as heavily as you can to those, even when it feels hard. And then final mindset tip is to remind yourself why you loved this particular story in the first place. Just go back and talk through, even just with yourself, why did you love this story? Why did you feel like you were the right person to tell this story? Why do you still want to tell this story? What is it you love about these characters? Why are you passionate about getting this on the page? And just continue to tap into that as often as you need it, because this story came to you for a reason and you were excited to tell it for a reason. So remind yourself of that, and also think about how it's going to feel once it's done. So often we're in this feeling of like it's taking too long and we're really beating ourselves up. But instead, if we just sort of future cast and think, oh my gosh, let me think of how it's going to feel once this is finished. Okay, now I'm going to get back in and I'm going to keep working on it. So find those little hacks and tricks for yourself. Don't give up on your story. Let me know if you have any other things that have helped you through the editing process. If you find it helpful, definitely like this video, subscribe to this channel. We've got lots more content coming this year on edits and things like that. We also have our notebook challenge coming up for March, a March reset, and lots of other fun things coming. So I hope that you'll subscribe and let me know if you have any other tips for how to stick with your story or how to continue to edit it and fix your story even when you feel like it has been slow going. I'd love to hear your feedback, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye.